Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In continuance of this Talim at ITV, I am going to talk about now, inshallah ta'ala, in conclusion, the situation of Islam in Africa and how things moved into the Americas. But I just wanted to touch upon Islam in Europe, a little bit. We had, many Muslims, rulers inside of Europe. And as such, we have to be reminded of the book by our beloved Sheikh, Dr. Abdul Hakim Quick, who's in his book, Deeper Roots, which talks about, Islam in the Caribbean, the Americas, and in some part, Islam in Europe. And he gives us reference to the book by Leo Warner, which is called Black Discovery of America. And I mention this book because it will lead into further discussion. So when Islam began to grow in Africa, it was growing at a time in which Europe itself was becoming united. You had the union between Ferdinand and Isabella, and they subsequently, joined forces, drove the Muslims out of Andalus, which was Muslim Spain, into North Africa. And that was the beginning of the conflict between Europe and Africa. In the mid-1400s, we see the Pope, who was a political as well as a religious figure during that time, divide the world up between Spain and Portugal. Everything above the northern equator belongs to Spain, and everything below the equator belongs to Portugal. That's why you have Muslims in Portugal, and you had Muslims present in the Americas, because many of those slaves, some say 30%, I say it's even more than that, of those slaves who came to America were Muslims. And in order to get a further illustration on that situation, we need to read the book by our beloved sister. She's not Muslim, but I think she's from West Africa. Her name is Sylvia Diouf, which she wrote a book, The Servants of Allah, in which she talked about the numerous amount of Muslims who were here in Americas. And if that's not good enough for you, there's also, a brother who has a African American Muslim museum down there in Washington, D.C., and you can contact Masjid Muhammad, to find out where it is. Occasionally, he will bring his stuff out to be viewed. I know his name is Muhammad, but I can't think of his whole entire name, but he deserves to be mentioned here. So we see that when they drove the Muslims out, they subsequently began to colonize certain regions. So they set up, what we call ports of entry into Africa. You had the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Belgium, and then you had, of course, you had the Spanish, and you had the Portuguese colonies, Mozambique, Angola, Guinea, not Guinea-Conakry, Guinea, and the Cape Verdes. And then you have the British, of course, the British, they had a thing, the sun will never shine upon a British empire. They control India. They tried to control Afghanistan. They tried to control, Egypt, they tried to control Australia, they tried to control in South America, British Honduras, which is the gay Belize. Then, you have the Caribbean, and then of course you had the American colonization, and the European colonization that we're concerned with is the English or the British colonization. Because we live here in New York City, this is where ITV is located, but probably many Muslims don't know that this was once a Dutch colony, that the Dutch had, established control over what we call New York. And it was subsequently when the British came, and Duke of York, who was a political figure at that time, he occupied the Dutch territories. The Dutch could not do anything at this particular time because British commercial trade and British military was very strong. So the British took it over, and the Dutch had to abdicate their control, and subsequently New Amsterdam became New York. And we're living here today, and many of us, I doubt if many of us know that. So what my beloved Sheikh Abdul Hakim Quick pointed out in his book, in a brief summation, is he pointed out that European colonization of the New Worlds began to expand after 1492. But prior to that, you had many civilizations here in the Americas, which had already had contact with Africans and already had contact with Muslims. You have the situation where Columbus went into the Caribbean. He never touched the New World. He made contact in Hispaniola, and Hispaniola is today the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and he made contact in Puerto Rico, and he made contact in Cuba. And these areas subsequently, they began to colonize, establish, their systems of government. And of course, everywhere the colonizer went, he took his religion. He took his religion, and in many cases, he imposed his religion upon the indigenous inhabitants. You will see situations where you have thousands upon thousands of Indians standing on the shore, and the man standing there with a cross and say, accept Jesus and be saved. And if you don't accept him, you're going to be annihilated. But they destroyed their temples of worship. They told them to negate belief in their culture, their history, their language, and accept their way of life. And this led to the situation where you have today inside of Central and South America, and as well as Mexico, you have Christianity, Catholicism being accepted. But you should read the book. The author of the book, he escapes me, because most of my books and my material is still in storage because I had to move. Most of the stuff has not been taken out, but I remember the title. It's God Against the Indian. A good book, an excellent book. If you get a copy from the bookstore, inshallah, you'll probably get, like I got, a book which is yellow. The pages are so brittle and old, but it's very informative and enlightening on how they established Christianity. Of course, we know that just recently the Catholic Church apologized and for all the taking of the Native American Indians and putting them into camps in which they were given Christian names, and they were told not to use their language. Their hair was cut. Any remnants of this Indian culture was destroyed, and so on and so forth. And so, Chief Red Cloud became, Little Richard. He became something else other than what he was before. And their history, although it's pretty much still retained today, it's unknown to most Americans. So I'm going to, stop there or wind it down, inshallah ta'ala, and get into the Colombian state of development at the present time. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wal 'asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihati wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr.